evening, everyone, and welcome to episode 123 of the Retrospectives podcast, Resident Evil 2. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. James, it is a delight to have you on once again, and we are returning to one of our favorite games, favorite series that we've ever played for the podcast, Resident Evil. How are you feeling about this one?
Oh, I was super pumped going into this one, right? Like, I think it's no stretch to say that the first game was, our favorite so far in the show. I was expecting to really enjoy it, although I did have my expectations tempered, as I think a large portion of the reason we enjoyed the first game so much was how unexpected that enjoyment was. Like, because I know I'm going into this one with this expectation of it being excellent, I reckon that I wasn't going to be blown away, and that was pretty much true, I think. We'll find that Resident Evil 2 is definitely an excellent game, but that missing factor of subverted expectation probably leads to a different feeling as you're playing it.
Yeah, well, for me, it was less that and more that I feel like they started to take the game in a different direction that I wasn't quite expecting. And I can better see the through line from Resi 1 to Resi 4 now with the, I guess, increased focus on set pieces and more of an action-y style to it. And while I wouldn't describe Resident Evil 2 as an action game, it has more in common with Resident Evil 4 than I quite expected, I guess.
Oh, interesting. I don't actually have that opinion, so this will be quite spicy, I think.
It should be, yeah. I feel a bit strange about this game, James. It's not quite what I expected, and the experience to me was actually quite different from Resident Evil 1. So I look forward to getting into the weeds with you about that. Straight up, what we will say is that we highly recommend you listen to our original episode on Resident Evil 1 because while we will mention things like tank controls and fixed camera angles and everything, we won't be going into nearly as much detail on why these are meaningful design decisions that affect the end gameplay experience. Just because there are other things to talk about and the changes I think are far more interesting. James, we mentioned it on the first episode, but we may as well recap slightly here. What's your experience with the Resident Evil franchise as a whole?
Yeah, so before playing 1, I think I'd played Resident Evil 7, which I found to be quite enjoyable, although it had a bit of a rough ending sequence. And then we, of course, played, Remake a few years ago now, which honestly, structure-wise, was pretty similar, where the start of the game was 10 out of 10 amazing, and then once it left the mansion it kind of petered out until it was a bit less fun overall near the end, but still good. So I haven't really touched the series since then, other than I was playing Resident Evil 4 actually, now that I think about it. So this will be probably my first return to the classic formula since we did the first game.
See, I went ahead and I played the 2019 Resi 2 remake.
Oh, so you know how so you knew how this was going to play out bit by bit, right?
Actually, it's surprising how different it is.
Okay.
Not just in the way the gameplay is structured, the story is structured. There are characters that exist in the remake that don't exist in the original. The layouts of the rooms are even different, and they kind of combine together in different ways. Although there are a lot of similarities, it's kind of chopped up a bit. So it was kind of uncanny for me because I recognized a lot of what was going on, but I wouldn't say that the gameplay experience was very similar. Resident Evil 2 takes a different direction and tack to the original, which I think is actually a good thing. Like, there's so many lazy ports and remakes out there. Resident Evil 2 Remake, despite sharing a name, is basically a completely different game, and I think it should be treated as such.
Nice. And how did you feel about the remake? Did you enjoy it?
I really, really liked it. I think that the remake is a very good game. My main problem with it is that there's, once again, weird dynamic difficulty going on. And it's very hidden how it works. But from my reading and understanding, enemies have variable health amounts that is somehow figured out by the amount of ammo you have. because you'll find that in every single boss fight, you tend to use up most of your resources. So it kind of acts as a resource reset, but it's very frustrating getting punished for good resource management decisions.
Mm.
But I guess it does mean that because they can keep resetting your resources, it means that they can keep a lot more tension as you progress through the game instead of you being absolutely loaded with ammo as you move towards the end.
Yeah, interestingly, I mean, we can get into this once the episode starts proper, but I think that variable health thing exists in this game too.
Oh, that's interesting. I found like I breezed through the game pretty easily. I never felt like the enemies had heaps of health, but maybe it's because I was dying a lot. I'm not
Yeah,
quite
it
sure.
might have been me hitting enemies in different spots, but it definitely felt like sometimes enemies would take like one extra shot, maybe, or two extra. Never like
See,
10 extra.
I feel that was headshot related because with the lickers, I had the same thing where like my bow gun would sometimes do a lot, but I figured that was because I was getting headshots.
That might be the case, yeah.
But yeah, Resi 2 Remake is a fantastic game. It's very good. And I have no problem saying that whatsoever. I know that's not exactly a controversial opinion. I know there are people who don't like remakes, but I think if you're going to do a remake, making it a radically different experience is a really good way to do it because it means that the old game is just as meaningful as the new one.
Yeah, I think as long as you kind of preserve the spirit of the original, I'm okay with it.
So that's our prior experiences with Resi 2. We should mention who we are and what we do. James and I are the Retrospectives podcast. What we do each and every episode is we play through a classic game of the past and then we review it from a modern perspective. What that means is that we're not trying to understand games in the context in which they were produced. We're simply trying to evaluate these games as if they had been released today. While this is a harsh standard of criticism, it is a fair one in the sense that you only have so many time to play games and your time is meaningful and you can play old games or new games. Art doesn't care how old things are. It just cares about how enjoyable the experience is. And that's the metric that we're evaluating it upon. The most interesting thing about this show is that while we have played plenty of old games that we consider stinkers, we have also discovered absolute gems, the original Resident Evil being one of them, with that game absolutely being in like the top 10 games that I've played in my entire life, despite me playing it only a couple of years ago. And it really showed that outdated, in inverted comma, design principles that that aren't really used anymore, such as tank controls and fixed camera angles, tying saving to inventory items, so on and so forth, are not actually outdated. And in fact, they're critically underused because all those things combined created an incredibly amazing experience. I had a really good time with the original Resident Evil, and it's very hard to find modern games that have these same features because the world has moved on. So it's a critical standard that we bring to these games, but it is one that we think helps us uncover the truly great games of the past, which is why we like to do it. So, in terms of where to start with our discussion, we should first off mention how we played it. So, this game released in 1998, published by Capcom for the PlayStation 1. It saw ports to several other locations, the Nintendo 64, the Dreamcast, Windows, and later on, even the GameCube, which is the version we played. These versions are mostly all similar. The GameCube version, from my reading, tends to be considered the best. And these are not remakes, these are just ports. So everything is the same, and there's some like extra content, I think, some updated textures, but it's mostly the same game. Did you have any issues playing it on Dolphin, James?
None whatsoever. It worked flawlessly for me.
Yeah, Dolphin once again is the GOAT emulator. Just zero issues ever. It's really nice. So we should talk about the story to begin with, James. What did you think of the story of Resi 2? Should we recap the story slightly for our listeners?
Like, I would say that the story in this game is a fairly big step up from the first, although I wouldn't say that step up lands it in the territory of like good. It's just like fine. I thought the story in the first game was pretty poor, honestly, and I still think it's like kind of lacking here. In terms of this being a horror title, I don't think it really introduces that feeling of mystery that I kind of was hoping for. Like, you know, there's zombies, you know that it's probably something that Umbrella did, you know, there's probably like a secret lab hidden somewhere. Like, I didn't really find any twists and turns that surprised me in this one. And I also didn't think that there was any particular piece of information that I was like dying to know the answer for. Like, I think narratively, the most interesting part of the setup here is that the game begins with two characters, Claire and Leon, in a cutscene who encounter each other. They both work for the police department. And the game has you pick whether to play as one or the other right from the beginning. And this actually has some narrative choice because story wise, they both go through the game separately and they kind of meet up here and there. And they go through the same play space and generally solve different puzzles and stuff. So you need to play both characters to get the full story.
Yeah, it's not like Resi 1 where you can play just one character and have an understanding of the story. You really need to play both characters, and I think a single playthrough does encapsulate both characters.
Yeah. And it's not just that like each character is different, it's that like there's your Claire playthrough and your Leon playthrough, but then there's also like the game expects you to play both. So there is the concept of the A playthrough and the B playthrough. So actually, depending on which order you play the characters in, slightly changes how things play out. Like there is narrative stuff that only happens in the first playthrough, no matter which character you pick, and there's stuff that happens in the second playthrough, no matter which character you pick. So I wouldn't say the game super incentivizes you to play the game through 4 times. Like,
You have to be into the gameplay at that point.
yeah, but definitely like 2 playthroughs, I'd say, are a minimum for getting the full experience here.
Yeah, see, I think it's a big step up from Resi 1. Resi 1 had that atrocious translation, and I think the voice acting was particularly bad. I
Yeah.
wouldn't go so far as to say it was good here, but there's a couple of things that really improve it. That split story, I think, is quite an interesting concept. I think it's done pretty well. It does
Mm.
require you to, you know, there's a bit of suspension of disbelief here since Claire and Leon are moving through the same space and sometimes solving the same puzzles, which no one's gone back and reset those puzzles between playthroughs, so you have to just go, yeah, this is fine. But I think it works really well. The other thing which I think is made me more engaged with the story is that there's more of an emotional thread guided by supporting characters.
Yeah.
Both Leon and Claire have a supporting character and they interact with them and have their own little kind of storyline that they follow with that character. And while, once again, this is an incredible writing, Resident Evil is still fundamentally B-movie horror, and that it wears its identity proudly on its sleeve. It does give you more of a continuous thread throughout the entire game that you enjoy following, I think. I do agree with you about the lack of mystery, though, James. Resident Evil 4, I think, had more mystery to it, despite it still following a lot of the same tropes of the Resident Evil formula.
Yeah, and like I actually think that my favorite moments narratively were the non like cutscene or diary kind of ones that happen naturally. There's this thing that happens throughout the game where one of the characters will make a choice, and that will actually impact your second playthrough. For example, in the first playthrough, you get a set of cables which you can use to repair some automatic windows, which will shut some zombies out in a couple of corridors. And you only get one, I believe, and you have to make a choice of where to use it. And like once you use it, on the next playthrough, that place will still be barricaded, so it'll actually have this sense of continuity. There's also a weapons locker halfway-ish through the game that has a choice of 2 items, either an inventory space increase or a weapon. And depending on whichever one you leave there, or both, the next character will find that in that room. And if you take both, then there's nothing for your next playthrough.
Yeah, you can imagine that maybe that was something that they had a lot more in the first version of this game, and they're like, this is too complicated. We need to be able to give enough resources to both playthroughs.
Yeah, like critically, like if there's healing items in a room and you take them, like they'll be there still for the second playthrough. Like there's
Yeah.
weird stuff where there's no overlap. In one of the playthroughs, you see a helicopter crash and it gets caught on fire, and you pour water on it to put the fire out. In the other playthrough, you don't see it crash, but it's still on fire even though you already put the water out, like put it out with the water. So
Mm.
and there's certain puzzles that can just, it's the same puzzle and it unsolves itself between your sessions, and you come back and you have to do the same puzzle again, which I think is kind of like a missed opportunity. What I really would have liked to see here is that solving the puzzle in the first playthrough basically turns it into a different puzzle that you have to come through at a different angle with the other character. Like if there was a pushing block puzzle, your solution ends up blocking a passage for the other character or something like that.
Yeah, that would be cool. It does sound
Like a lot
very
of work
challenging.
though. Yeah.
It sounds like a lot of work. See, I kind of viewed these different playthroughs almost like remixes. When we played through Zelda 1, we didn't actually talk about that much, but there's a second quest.
Yeah.
Did you know about that,
Yeah,
James?
I did notice that.
Yeah, and that's like a remix where all the items are in different places and everything. What these different playthroughs feel like from a gameplay are remixes where they shuffle all the items and puzzles around and then
mm,
you go through the game again. It almost feels ROM hacky in a sense, like those randomizers that exist
yeah.
where they just put everything in different places and then because everything's in different places, the way you get through it and approach it is different. And for me, I think that's enough. Like, I can suspend my disbelief here and just pretend they're alternate realities or whatever.
Oh, I
Um,
Yeah, don't get me wrong. I think it's excellent. Like this really like it made playing through the game a full 2 times like totally enjoyable.
yeah,
Which I think is great. I'm just saying that, if they went that extra step, this would be like
it would have been amazing.
an
Yeah.
all-time, yeah, amazing. It still is.
Definitely better than something like Near Automata's, the way it forces you to replay through the game. In my mind, it felt significantly different to me.
Yeah, it did. And honestly, like to me, that's the most unique thing about this game for me, having played the first one, because it's mostly similar in a lot of ways, but that kind of element really added a lot to the experience for me. It's definitely like the highlight of the entire thing.
Yeah, I was kind of, the other thing about this game is that it's very short, and this
Yeah.
is where my experiences with the remake might have thrown me off a bit, because the remake, they expanded on a lot of sections and they added a lot of puzzles and things like that. This game, once you get through the police station, you're like 2/3 done. There's only really two more bits after that: the sewers and the labs, and those bits do not take very long to go through. So it's not like you're having to slog through this big long game and then do it again. It probably takes about 5 to 6 hours, or at least it did for me for the first playthrough, and then maybe 3 to 4 hours for the second playthrough.
Yeah. I would say that this idea that you're bringing up here is probably the second best thing about the game for me, is that Resident Evil 2, and much similar to the first game, really doesn't like to repeat itself or waste your time with big, pointless puzzles. Like there's a couple of short ones, and then most things aren't repeated. Like you'll do something, you won't see that again in the whole game. There's lots of unique rooms. The levels design is it's like tiny but very tightly interconnected. Like they make a lot of use of the limited space they have here. Which means that, I found it very easy just to sit there and play it because, you're always seeing something new. The game is always throwing something more interesting at you. Maybe not in terms of like enemies, but definitely in terms of like set piece design and that kind of thing.
I'd say that I didn't really get lost in this game either. Like I was never like, what do I do now? Because I
Yeah.
always had a key that I could use to open a door that I hadn't been to, or I had a key item that I realized that I could use in a particular place. There's a lot of clarity to this game. I will say, and I will get to more of this in the gameplay, I don't think this is all upside. There is a linearity to Resi 2 that I think doesn't exist. Like, I think Resi 1 was felt more open and confusing.
Yeah.
And it was less clear on what you could do or where you could go. Resi 2, and this is part of why I said I can see the later actiony through line from the early to the later ones. This does feel like it has more set pieces, and it does feel like there's more of a clear direction for you to go at all times.
Yeah, that said, I think that, less confusion like that they've introduced is probably going to be a positive for some, like a subset of the audience, right? So I think your mileage may vary with how much you appreciate, the linearity versus like having lots of options and being not sure where to go next.
Notably, post police station, it's very linear. Like the last third of this game is just like a straight line a lot of ways.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about this. One of my criticisms of the first game was that the mansion was like a 10 out of 10 and the rest of the game was like a 7 out of 10 or so. For me at least, Resident Evil 2 doesn't have this problem. It's like a 9 out of 10 for the whole experience almost. There's very little like when I was playing through in the second, run, I didn't get to a bit where I was like, oh, I hated this in the first playthrough and I don't want to do this. It was just fine the whole way through.
Yeah, I like spoilers for my opinions, but I'm actually much lower on Resi 2 than I was Resi 1, James.
Okay.
So while I do agree with you, I think that for me, the golden part of Resi 1 is that first playthrough of the mansion, and that's the part that I really hold as a 10 out of 10, and then it drops down. Resi 2 is definitely more consistent in terms of quality. It's just that I was less high on that first bit, and therefore on the game as a whole.
Yeah, I'm trying to work out why, because I sort of feel similarly, probably not to the extent that you do. So, firstly, I think it's that thing that I mentioned earlier in the episode where, like, I already had a high expectation going into this one. So, like, I didn't get that surprise and that sense of like I spent the next, several days just thinking about the game. Like, I didn't have that with this, like I did the first game. The second one, I think. There's a few things that were missing here. Like Resi 1, my favorite moment in the whole game is when the doorknob breaks and it changes everything. There wasn't like a moment like that in this game. And also, like in Remake, I don't know if it exists in the first, like the original, but the concept of burning the bodies was not present here. And that was a big part of my enjoyment of the first game. There was less like tactical decision making on your routing and like trying to make safe spots and working with your limited resources. Just taking away that one bit of resource management actually has like a really big effect on how the whole resource management loop kind of feels, because you do want to take risks and go out and burn bodies. And then I think the third thing is that I think I'm better at these games now. So I was just better at resource management, which meant near the end of the game I was like drowning in healing items, whereas the first time around in Resi 1 I was not at all.
Yeah, I think the second thing for me is the biggest thing, although the third thing you mentioned about being better at the games is also definitely relevant. So in the second game you had, or at least with the character I played, I had 6 inventory slots.
Yeah. Here you
And
have
when
like
you
10.
went out into the world, you wanted to take fuel with you. You wanted to take a weapon with you. You probably wanted to take a healing item, and you wanted to take some spare ammo.
And a key.
This gives you 2 inventory slots, right? So as you go out and you find healing items and quest items and ammunition for different weapons and keys, because, oh yeah, that's right. With Chris, you had to have old keys as well to open a lot of these drawers and doors. You did not have enough inventory space. So you had to make a tactical decision. Oh, I'm not going to take spare ammo, or oh, I'm not going to take a healing item with me as I venture out into the world. The even bigger thing I think is the fact that I was had way less ammo in Resident Evil 1 than I had in Resident Evil 2, or at least I felt I did. I felt like I there were zombies that I could not kill. Like I just couldn't because I didn't have enough ammo and I wasn't good enough to just kill them all with the knife.
Yeah, I actually took risks in the first game and tried to use the knife. I just immediately banked it in this game and never took it out again.
Yeah, me too. I just because in this game in Resident Evil 2, you can kill all the zombies. All of them. You can kill all the zombies and all the lickers and have ammo to spare. The resource management here, and I will say it's a bit tougher in the second playthrough, but even then you have more than enough ammo to kill everything. So what that meant is that in Resident Evil 1, you would have these spaces with zombies in them that you would leave alive, and then you would have to travel through those places over and over again, risking damage every single time. And then you would have to make the decision to kill certain zombies because you'd identified that a corridor was a place
Like
that
a
you'd
high
go
traffic
through a lot.
area, yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. So the tactical decision making in Resident Evil 1, and when I say Resi 1, I'm really talking about that mansion bit because after that it does drop off a lot, is ever present and multi layered and exists in a whole bunch of different ways. There were times where I would run a very light inventory and I'd go out into the world with the intention of just collecting resources. As I was playing Resi 1, I made a map, like I hand drew a map so that I
Hmm.
could write down where the resources were. And then I would plan an expedition out to get those resources and bring them back to my safe box. But that wasn't even the end of it, because then I had to make a decision on whether to use one of my ink ribbons to save the game and make a determination: have I actually made enough progress at this point to use a save, or do I need to now go out into the world, make a bit more progress on my estimation, and then be able to and then finally be happy with a save? None of this exists in Resident Evil 2. Like it's just not there. There's way less transitionary spaces. You have heaps of ammo. After you kill enemies, they literally disappear. Like their corpses
Yep.
disappear from the map. All of this put together made the game, I don't know, far less satisfying and interesting to me than the original game.
Yeah, I basically agree with all that. It's interesting because overall, I still think 2 is really good in a lot of ways. Like, it's more consistent. The playthrough idea is super interesting. Just generally, I think it's just well made and it feels good to control even now. Like as good as tank controls can feel, right?
Hmm.
Um, but I do agree. There's less like there's less points where you have to really knuckle down and carefully consider what you're doing. I really found myself playing quite quickly, and there was barely like I checked the map, but like that thing you described of really having to plan out what your next move was isn't really a thing here. Which was interesting because I think forcing you to do that kind of thing really adds a lot of atmosphere to your horror game where the enemies are really threatening, like you have to take each one very seriously. Um, Whereas, like, I think 2 actually did a good job of setting the scene because I think the opening couple of hours or like first intro bit is significantly more challenging than the rest of the game, like in
Yep.
terms of because I don't actually like on the second playthrough that opening bit wasn't challenging at all in the way that it was to me when I first started playing because you have to get readjusted to the controls and figure things out and like you have to work out how to get past lickers, for example. I died to the first licker like 5 times because I once I got to it, like I'd taken some chip damage from zombies on the way in,
Hmm.
and then it would one hit me with any attack, so I had to like really figure out how to get past it. Once that was done, I didn't have an experience like that again. Um, but it did kind of set the scene for me for the next couple of hours that made enemies feel threatening because they were initially. And then once I kind of figured it out and realized, oh, that was kind of an illusion. Yeah, I think my enjoyment kind of dropped from like pretty high to just, okay.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong, like I died plenty of times in this game, mainly because I was struggling with the controls and trying to shoot down, and I'd be shooting off to the left or whatever.
Yeah.
There were a couple of times where there were rooms with like six zombies in them, and I got a bit overwhelmed. But you can generally still retreat and get away. It's just that having these rooms with like six zombies in them in a closed in space, and there's like a critical item behind them, and having to shoot 30 pistol bullets into them, there's nothing interesting about that. Like it's not
Those
it's
rooms, I think, screamed at me like use the shotgun, use the grenade launcher. Like, is there
Yeah,
like that's the one case where it's more efficient? Because I was probably like you in that I like tried to use the pistol whenever possible because it was less valuable.
yeah. But yeah, also I was stupid and didn't like I missed the grenade launcher, and I was
Oh,
like playing through the because it's inside a locker, and I just didn't think to press A on that locker for whatever reason in the office,
oh
in the
no,
STARS office.
yeah.
So I went I kind of was like, I feel like I should have a grenade launcher by now, and then I looked it up and was like, I'm an
Ah,
idiot. I was meant to get this
I
a long
almost
time ago.
missed it. I found visibility in the PS1 game a bit harder than in remake, so I kind of just defaulted to mashing A on walls. And
Well,
there was actually a lot of spots where the character bent down and picked up something off screen that you just can't see because it's
there are
behind a
heaps of
shelf.
hidden items in this game. There's
Yeah.
heaps. You spam A on everything.
Yeah, and once you realize that, like, I didn't notice that for like the first third of my first playthrough.
Right.
But I'd figured it out by the end, so when I came to the second playthrough, I was just like swimming with items. Because if you get everything, you're just loaded, right?
Yeah. So overall, James, like, I see, I agree. I don't want to be too harsh because I do think that this is still a good game, and I think that the thing I would praise above and beyond everything is the broad level design. It does, like you said earlier, it does a really good job with quite small spaces, joining all these unique kind of rooms together in a very compact way, and the way it loops together and rejoins in on itself until you have free reign over the entire station and can take all these different paths through the station is quite cool. It's just not nearly as meaningful from a gameplay design point of view. Like I have such fond memories of the original Resident Evil, and with this one I just murdered everything, and
Yeah.
that kind of ruined it a little bit for me. So I was pretty disappointed with this game, even if objectively it's not actually that bad. It just feels like such a step back for me, and I don't really understand why people consider this one to be their favorite because I know a lot of people absolutely adore this game. I don't see how after playing Resi 1 you can go back to Resi 2 and go, "Yes, this is a better game," because it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah, I sort of see that. I think a lot of players like don't actually enjoy that kind of like resource management and planning and manually mapping stuff. Like I know people find that tedious, so I can understand like if they see those things as a negative, then this one is vastly superior, right? Because it doesn't, have the things they don't like and it has everything that's good, in
Yeah,
their
and
eyes.
certainly when you replay these games and get good at them, I think that the resource management thing becomes irrelevant because you have
Yeah.
like a path plotted through, and you can be very efficient, and your movement's really good. The people who are good at these games can just basically run through them without stopping and taking no damage. So
Which is
perhaps from that perspective, like more of an action game, Resident Evil 2 is more fun to play through.
Yeah, I don't really see the appeal of playing through this game like lots and lots of times unless you like install a randomizer mod. Like
Speed
the
running mainly. I think that
yeah, but like I don't get why you'd want to speedrun this game. I feel like I don't know. It's once you know it, like all of that, like all of the stuff that's amazing about the game comes from the unknown. Once the veil is lifted, it's gone forever, right?
did you find it strange how a lot of the time key items were like literally right next to puzzles?
Yeah, that was a bit odd. There was a few that you had to hold on for a while before you could use them, like the gems, I think.
Yes. That felt very classic Resi, the whole gems, the gem puzzles.
Yeah, I
And
felt one.
getting the three medallion things.
Yeah, I think there was too many ink ribbons, and they were all right next to the typewriter, which was kind of
They
removed
always
that.
came in pairs. Yeah.
Yeah, I wish they came in ones, and you had to find additional ones outside of this, like the typewriter. Also, if they came in ones, it means you could use it and not have to worry about sticking the rest in the bag or whatever. Um, wish it could split stacks.
Yeah, you
um,
can't split stacks, can you? Maybe you
no,
can.
but what you can do is when you have two, you can use one of them and then you can put it in a different spot in the bag. You just have
Right.
like 7 stacks of one, uh, which helps a little bit. How did you feel about atmosphere and music? We should probably go to a music break soon.
Oh,
I
actually, I think these were both really, really good.
Okay.
One thing that I think these classic Resi games have over the modern ones is they have this sense of creepiness to the atmosphere.
Yeah.
The remake did a lot with its puzzles to try to make them more realistic. I say realistic in inverted commas, like it's very tongue in cheek realistic, but they tried to make them make sense in the game world. Resident Evil 2 and 1's puzzles have this weird gothic feeling to them that you
Yeah.
never quite shake off. And I think that the music is excellent. Like I think the music is really, really good at it being creepy and unsettling. It's not scary. Maybe this was scary when it released, but it's not remotely scary today. But it is unnerving to make your way through these spaces and the ominous way. Every time you press on something to examine it and it like cuts to a different camera angle of that item or object. It's very good. So I think that both the music and atmosphere are excellent.
Yeah, I think I want to give special shout outs to the UI and the sound design. Like something I think I underappreciated the first time around is that everything that you do in the game is like slow. Like and like when you're pushing blocks around, there's this big stone gothic block that scrapes across the floor in this like rickety way, and it's not quick, it's like slow and plodding. Whenever you go through your inventory, it's not very, it's like, it feels intentionally a bit slower, like it's not super snappy. Everything is very deliberate, methodical. Because, like, I feel like if all the puzzles and your movement and the menu navigation was super speedy, it would kind of like immersion break a little bit. But everything in this game is geared towards the like survival horror atmosphere, and I think it does a lot much better job than I was expecting coming back to the PS1 era games. I still think that the like remakes, like the artistry that went into a lot of the fixed camera angles and the that one hallway where you look down to the bird cage, just incredible. There was nothing on that level here for me, but it's still pretty good.
Yeah, I agree with that. The camera angles were more functional this time round.
There was a couple of bad ones. I noticed there was like at the end of the game when you open that door and the plants are there for the first time, like I feel like it's intentionally has them off screen so you get hit by
Doesn't
the
it play an animation?
Yeah, it shows you they're there, but when the
Yeah.
game resumes, like they're off screen around the corner and they can shoot you. So
Wow, you're a noob, James. I just killed them.
yeah, I tried to do that too, and then I raised my gun and pressed shoot, and it activated the button next to me, or tried to investigate it, and then I got hit. It was like,
Amazing.
fucking
Yeah,
hell.
yeah. The Jill's flame gun obviously is really good in against those plants.
I think the flame gun's there on the first playthrough because I had that on Leon on my first playthrough. I didn't see it
Ah,
again the second time. Yeah,
right. Okay. Yeah. So I think that and a lot of the time the camera angles of the zombie will be just around the corner, kind of hovering idle, and it feels sometimes that it's very difficult to avoid taking damage there. But I don't know if it was the same for you, James, but I felt like you didn't really take that much damage. Like if you shook the zombie off straight away,
yep.
like you maybe took like an eighth of your health bar.
I actually
Uh,
intentionally, that thing around the floor and they grab your leg and then you stomp their
you
head.
can kick
I,
their head off.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I was like intentionally triggering that because it's ammo efficient.
yeah. It's just mad. Like I in the remakes, you can take like 3 hits and then you die. Like it's always 3 hits or 4 hits, 3 or 4 hits.
Yeah.
You just have way more health hit. Anyway, sorry, we're getting a bit distracted. We were talking about the atmosphere and music, so we should go to a music break, James.
Yeah, so did you have a particular track that you wanted to, cover?
Yeah,
Um,
so my two favorite tracks were Library and the Main Hall, in that they were kind of ominous and creepy with piano tones, and I felt like these two tracks really encapsulated that creepy atmosphere I was mentioning, and that it's not just relentless ambient droning. It's got some flavor to it, but it still feels unsettling with that edge of tension to the situation. So the one I'm going to choose is Library. Library was probably my favorite.
and I thought that one was pretty good, yeah. So here is Library. Alrighty, so that was the Library. Pat, I had a good question for you as somebody who has played Resident Evil 2 Remake. What is your opinion on Mr. X? Because I had a friend that I used to work with who was always telling me about his existence in the remake, and then I found it to be, a bit whatever in this one. I was
Yeah,
kind of
it's
expecting more from it.
well in the remake you can't really kill him, which makes it like he's significantly different.
Oh, can you
He
kill him in this one?
Well, you can take him down for a while.
Oh, I just ran away every time.
Okay. In the remake, he just follows you relentlessly. Which is a cool idea in
Does he
theory in
go
the
through
remake.
doors?
Yes, he does. Yeah.
Ooh.
Yeah, so
Oh.
it's actually a really cool idea in theory, right? Because the idea is that as you're walking around trying to do puzzles and everything, or shooting zombies, and there's still plenty of zombies left alive because the remake gives you way less ammo. Um,
Oh, does it?
he,
Okay.
yeah, the remake way more resource management. He will follow you around and interrupt you trying to do this thing while you're being attacked by any zombies. Really cool idea, right? The problem is that most of the time, the best course of action, if you're trying to solve this puzzle or whatever that requires you to stand in place for a long time, is to get away from him and come back later. And there are these weird situations where you'll be inside a safe room and he can't get into the safe room, and he'll be outside the safe room, and you have to wait for him to leave before you can get out. So you'll wait 30 seconds, you'll step out again, and he'll still be nearby. So you run back to the safe room. It's really painful. So Mr. X is like very cool when you first encounter him and a couple of times after, and then he's not
Just gets
really
annoying.
threatening.
Yeah.
He's just an annoying nuisance, yeah. In this game, he's a big nothing. He's far more of a threat in the remake, but he's also far more annoying and not in a good way. So
Mm.
they changed him significantly in the remake.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting. I'm surprised that you say it's more resource intensive in the remake. I would have thought in a post Resident Evil 4 world that it would have been less, if anything, but
You have way less
I
resources in
guess
the
it's a
remake.
post RE7 and 8 world as
Yeah,
well, so
you, in the remake, you have the thing where you leave zombies alive. It also has the dismemberment, so you've got the option to like,
does that persist too? Like you take something's arm off and it has missing arm for the rest of the game? Is that what you're
yeah.
saying?
Although what a lot of the time what you'll do is you'll shoot their leg off so they fall to the floor, which makes them less threatening, but they can still grab you. You can also like shoot them to stun them and then run by. Resi 2 remake is closer to Resi 1 in terms of resource management and style than Resi 2 is. Like it's a very good game. I far preferred the remake.
you're much higher on the remake. Okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Resi 2 Remake also has the fact that shooting the enemies is just more enjoyable because you're aiming for enemies instead of it just being on a
Oh, the
2D
up and
plane.
down thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
this is something I mentioned in the original game as well. Like, shooting enemies wasn't the interesting part of it, it was all of the tactical decisions that surrounded the decision to shoot an enemy. Resi 2's moment to moment gameplay of shooting the zombies is just more fun and engaging.
Okay. That's interesting. How did you feel about lickers? To me, they were, much more challenging than the zombies, obviously. And I know from a lot of people's opinions that they hate them. But it's kind of that like thing where like it's a good thing that they hate them, right? Like it makes the game better. Would you
Yeah, the
agree?
Lickers are a great enemy. I knew the trick with them because I'd played the remake, so I
Yeah.
knew that as long as you were silent, you wouldn't be detected. And they position the Lickers in a lot of situations where you do kind of have to kill them because they're blocking the entire path.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're a good enemy. Claire makes short work of them because those acid rounds normally kill them in a single hit. But before you have many of those acid rounds, they're a real threat, and I usually took some amount of damage before killing them. And on a couple of occasions, I was shooting my crossbow wildly around and nowhere near them, and died as a consequence.
Yeah. I had a few jump and dodge a few shots. Like they weren't intentionally doing it, but yeah, I missed a couple because of their movement. It's good.
Resi 2, and I mean, this is something that the games don't really get to till Resi 4, which is that they don't mix and match enemies much. Like, you have a room either with zombies or a room with a
Yeah.
licker. You notice that it never really tried to combine them into a single space.
Yeah, they don't have the like the Doom thing of enemy composition is the whole game kind of thing.
Yeah.
They don't throw interesting like, this enemy plus this enemy creates a completely different encounter to them when they're on their own or in pairs of just two of the same.
And if you
Um,
remember, Resi 4 definitely does this. It'll have the shield guy, crossbow guys, etc. And you
yeah,
have to juggle those things from an action point of view. That's a lot of fun. I just want to emphasize that, like, in general, fighting enemies is not like
super
it's
interesting
not
here.
deeply fun. You know?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Especially like the enemy variety is super low, right? Like
Yeah.
there's zombies, there's lickers, there's dogs, there's fucking spiders. Gotta hate those.
I tried to shoot them at first, and then I couldn't hit them, so I just ran past them. So
Yeah, I murdered them. Like, I went out of my way to kill every single one so I didn't have to see them anymore. Like, I hate them so much.
God, the sound effect for them was so weird as well. Like, it's like the thumping of their limbs on the
Yeah, oh
walls.
my
Yeah.
god, the way every time you see them for the first time, they do this thing where there's a wall really close to the camera and it's sitting there, so it's like the screen transitions and just the whole screen is half a spider. It's like fucking jump scare.
Yeah, they're pretty freaky spiders. And then
Yeah.
you have at the end, you've got the super lickers, the ones with blade arms.
I didn't even notice they were different, honestly. Like, I just was blasting them with the grenade
Right.
launcher.
And you had like the plant people that would shoot at you, and
Yeah.
some weird, stronger zombies as well.
And then there was like some mini boss style things like the crocodile and the moth, I guess.
How bad were the bosses in this game, by the way?
Pretty shit. Like, they were just like enemies with more
With lots
health.
of health. Yeah.
Yeah. And
And you just
then
ran back and forth shooting them, like terrible.
yeah, actually quite bad. Yeah, the only one that was cool was the crocodile because it was more of a puzzle than a boss.
Yeah, and it was very satisfying seeing it explode.
Yeah, yeah, a bit disappointing in the enemy department, I have to say. I did actually like the weapon variety in this game. Like, I think there
Yeah,
was more than in one, unless I'm mistaken. Like, I got to use a lot of different guns, and they felt pretty satisfying to use. I liked how the grenade launcher had different rounds, although ultimately, I don't think the ammo choice mattered that much. Like, it did a little bit, but you weren't picking yourself if you had the wrong ammo type.
no, it was more about managing which one would be. I guess I was like acid rounds are the best. Like I knew acid rounds were the best, so I was saving those for the liquors and everything. And I used a couple early on in some tricky situations. When you have those large clumps of enemies, you want to use the best ones for the job. But yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that the variety of guns is quite good. I really liked the crossbow as a gun. I
Yeah,
thought
it's
it was
sweet.
quite fun to use. It had a cool sound effect, and was pretty effective as well.
We talked about this last time on the Zelda episode where we had this concept of soft keys where progression was sometimes gated by your items. I
Mm.
think there was this thing here too where there was often at the start of the game, there was like a room that had so many zombies. It wasn't really like viable to go through there until you had the shotgun or the grenade launcher,
Yep,
which I thought was all
completely
right.
agree.
Yeah.
Actually, that was the point where I looked up like where the grenade launcher was because there's a room where there's like six zombies in a locker room, and there's several items in the lockers, and I only had my handgun and a crossbow with not much ammo left at that point. I was like,
Where is it?
I must be missing something here. Like this game, I don't understand how I'm meant to get through this with you know 28 bullets,
Man,
and then I found it.
that room that connects to it's like the very entrance of the police department where it swings round. And it has like six zombies in there at the start.
Yeah, I opened that. It was like I'm not going this way, and then I turned around and went the other way.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah,
Did you get the grenade launcher before you cleared that, or did you
no,
just
I had enough handgun ammo at that point that I could just shoot them all, and that
Yeah.
was the point where I was like, that was a bit silly that I
Soft
just shot
keys.
them all. Yeah,
Yeah.
but like you can imagine if there were three zombies there and you had less ammo and that was a spot that you had to travel through a lot, it would be more interesting. There was a corridor. There's a corridor that leads to like a interrogation room with a double mirror,
Mm.
and I left the three zombies alive in that corridor. I wasn't trying to shoot them, and I had to keep going back and forth through there. I was like, oh, this is a bit like classic Resi. I have to kind of dodge
Uh,
them.
the jump scare in that room is so silly. Because, like, if you go through both rooms without triggering the jump scare, like, you can see that the rooms are empty. It's so stupid. And then you go into one, pick the item up, and this monster jumps through the window, and you're like, he wasn't in that room. I just went in there.
Some of those jump scares were quite good though. Like they got me multiple times with them.
Yeah, and they weren't like, I don't know, sometimes jump scares feel a bit cheap. Those ones felt like well put in. Or like the hands coming through
Through
the
the
door.
windows,
Yeah, that
yeah.
was great. Yeah.
Yeah, that
I
freaked
don't
me out.
yeah, I don't think it was actually threatening either.
I got grabbed by them. I don't know if it did damage, but
Yeah, I don't think so. Actually, one thing I was annoyed about was on the first playthrough, I barricaded the windows, and then I started the second one, and immediately zombies broke through there. It was like, what was the point of doing that?
yeah, I think that happened to me as well.
Was like very confused. Where's this choices matter bullshit? It should just be the other side gets super filled up, not this one.
Yeah, I see what you mean. When you're playing this, you can't help but think like, what if they did this game, but it was like way more, there
Reactive
was
or
way more
whatever.
integration between the playthroughs. There's a game, Prey
Is
has
it
its
more in
moon crash.
two remake?
Sorry,
Is does
it's
the re
less.
really?
Yeah. That's something that they don't really try and do. The playthroughs are very much independent of one another.
Oh, my friend told me that like he played through all the characters in both orders like 4 or 6 times. because he thought it was like worth doing in both directions. That's
Well,
interesting.
gameplay wise, yes, but just in terms of like you know, things influencing each other through playthroughs, not really. Prey Mooncrash, the DLC for Prey, has this going on in a far bigger way, James, where you can like leave items for the other characters that you will be playing through at specific spots, and then when you play that character, you can pick them up.
Yeah, I should play that at some point.
You definitely should. It's fantastic. But yeah, that's the closest I've come to a full realization of this system. Here it's kind of like just little bits and pieces.
Yeah, and it still adds to the game. It's probably really fucking hard to design a whole game like that.
I had a question for you, James, and this is something that I guess became more obvious the more I played. What do you think about the fact that you can freely pause at any time you want to reload your guns and heal up to full?
Yeah, I don't mind the healing so much. I think that the reload, like the fact that if you reload in the menu, it's instant, whereas it's not if you run out of ammo near a zombie, is really bad. Because once you start counting ammo, you can just like, you just reload, like once you got nothing left in the menu, and now you're basically immune to taking damage from enemies. Because in my first playthrough, it was always the unexpected reload that made me take damage. When that doesn't cost anything, it's like a bit shitty. I could I could see them doing health as well, but I don't think it's necessary in the same way that the ammo like kind of breaks the game.
They totally should, man. Estus Flask. It's the best. Well, it's the best way to do healing, right? Because you need to try to find a safe space to heal instead of like just doing it when you're at low. I think part of the problem is there's no incentive really to heal until your health is super low.
There's also like there is incent like you need to reload in the heat of combat. Like you basically never need to you basically never need to heal in the middle of combat unless it's like the last boss or something. Because you can always just do it in a safe room. So I actually don't think making it like Estus would do anything because I just never use it until the room was clear, and then it would be the same anyway with just a longer animation.
Weren't
Whereas,
you? I was like running around with like barely any HP though until I was like one hit away from death, and then I would heal. If healing actually was a cost, then like if I couldn't just pause to heal,
it,
then
if I
I
could,
might have more of a safety barrier
if I couldn't pause to heal, then what I would do would abuse the fact that opening doors is instant, and I would just go through the door, heal,
and heal
then
on
go
the other
back.
side.
Yeah,
Yeah,
like
that's a good point actually. It doesn't, lock you out from an area. Always run away.
yeah. Whereas like you actively need to reload in the middle of combat sometimes. So I'm actually near the end of my notes. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I'm feeling bad, James, because I've been complaining a lot about this game, and I don't know if that's just because I went into it with an expectation
Yeah,
that it
it's the
would be close to
expectation
Resi 1.
thing, I reckon. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I just think for me, the magic of the first game basically isn't here. What you have is you have an enjoyable kind of like experience with cool level design, but the depth, the things that made Resident Evil 1 a 10 out of 10 basically just aren't present here because of all of these changes that they've made. And it just boggles, like, I just don't understand why they changed it in this way. I don't understand how this can be people's favorite. So I don't dislike Resi 2, like I enjoyed my time with it, but yeah, just a little surprised.
That's fair. So I guess that leads us into final impressions, you reckon?
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I'll just continue on. Do I recommend Resident Evil 2? Yes, I do recommend it. And I have been very negative this episode. I'm sorry for that. I think it is a good game. I think that it still has a lot of what makes classic survival horror enjoyable. There's still resource management. There's still tough enemies, not because they're they're strafing all over the place, but because you do have limited ammo and you do need to keep track of your ammo, you need to keep track of your healing. I think the level design here is excellent. Like, it's really fun seeing the police station become increasingly interconnected and develop that mental map. What's missing here is the tactical decision making and planning from Resident Evil 1. And I think that this is ultimately for the worse. This is the beginning of Resident Evil moving towards a more action orientated sort of gameplay style. But the problem is it doesn't commit to it in the same way that Resident Evil 4 does. Whereas Resident Evil 4 was a really fun tactical shooter, Resident Evil 2 isn't quite. It feels like it's dabbling in a more action style. And in doing so, it's kind of lost what made the first game great, but it hasn't quite achieved the greatness of the later action games in the franchise. So while, yes, I do recommend Resident Evil 2, it's with a big caveat, and it's probably the one I've enjoyed the least. I also think this is an instance where the remake is much better and much more fun than the original. That doesn't mean that everyone will enjoy the remake more, and it's not that you shouldn't play the original. I just think that the remake captures more of what made Resi 1 specials than the sequel. So recommend it, but ultimately I'm disappointed because I thought I'd be seeing a continuation of the original and I didn't get that.
Yeah, so for me, I sort of agree with Pat, but at the same time, like, Resident Evil 2 to me is an excellent game still. One that's level design is so good that I was happy to do two very close playthroughs of it without, taking issue. The police station is just incredibly well designed. Like, I think this is more well designed overall than the areas like in Resident Evil 1. But like Patrick, I do agree that the moment to moment decision making, the really interesting moments like the door handle thing not being here, the choice to burn zombies, that kind of takes away from it. Um, which, ultimately still leaves us with an extremely good game. This is a very tightly paced, well designed game with rooms that do not waste time, do not repeat themselves very often. Even across two playthroughs, there is very limited repetition. So, this one's an easy recommend for me. I don't think I enjoyed it as much as Remake 4 or 7, but it's still like, definitely give this one a go at some point because it's just, a masterclass in level design.
Question, James. You say the game doesn't waste your time. There were definitely a couple of instances where I felt like I was doing a lot of running around empty rooms to get specific inventory items. Did that ever happen to you?
The only time I can think of is in the sewer area with the platform
Right?
that goes up and down.
Yeah.
Because there's a typewriter there, but not a chest, and there's actually like a glut of items in that section, but no chest to do the inventory management. That was the only misstep in terms of level design in the whole game, I reckon. But it was pretty annoying in both playthroughs.
Yeah, there were a couple of times where I was just like it felt like I was just running from empty room to empty room, opening doors because I'd reach an area that needed an item and then I'd have to go back to the chest to get the item and then I'd bring it all the way back. But I guess that's just part of Resident Evil, right?
This problem is a lot less when you can't kill every enemy and some of those corridors are still engaging because they're still scary.
Yes.
When
Yeah.
when you've cleared everything and you're just running back and forth between the chest, yeah, that is, that's not super fun. So on that level, I think that's the one of the biggest things you lose by making the ammo and the resources less important. Is just the player gains the ability to make the game boring, and they will because it's the most efficient.
Yeah, and I do think that like you raised a good point. We didn't really cover it, which is that you and I are just better at these games now. It could be that if I go back and play Resident Evil 1, I end up having a lot more ammo than I originally realized. Like
Yeah,
I'm totally open to that understanding.
yeah, especially if you played it again and played as Jill, because then you'd have the lockpicks and two extra inventory slots.
Yeah.
Like
I
I had.
also I also know where the secret ammo is. Like there's a corridor with two things of ammo hiding underneath these dresses that you can push. Like
Oh
30
yeah,
extra
right at the
bullets and
start of the game. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, I know that
30
one.
extra bullets then would have, made a big difference, I think.
Remake one also has that thing where like every so often stuff will happen, like the dogs will break into the house, or after you get back from the mine, these other enemies will invade the house, and it like refreshes all the rooms, kind of.
Mm.
That was lacking here. Although
Uh,
you do have the
I, I
bit where the zombies pour in from the windows, which was like kind of okay.
I actually think Resi 2 frequently repopulates areas. I would return to areas and there'd be lickers there, for example, when there were no zombies, which seemed to happen when you advance certain puzzles and events.
Yeah, I
Um,
guess that's true.
but it wasn't the same as Resi 1 where it felt more, I guess, dynamic. Here it feels like, and I think a big part of that is because like all the corpses are gone and everything. It's just they've repopulated. They've like been dropped in from thin air.
Also, in this game, if there was an enemy, I'd just swap to the launcher, blast it, and be done with it, and then keep going. It's
Yeah,
not, yeah, the decision's gone.
there's no avoiding it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's Resident Evil 2. Overall, I was a bit more down on it than I expected, but I'm still glad we played it because, as I said, I know this one is many people's favorites. So, James and I are the Retrospectives podcast. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. It's got links to all of our content, a bunch of articles we've written, and most importantly, our social media stuff like our Discord server. If you enjoy the show, we would love if you would join our Discord server. It's where we get feedback and, most importantly, recommendations. So if there's a game that you'd like to see us play, we'd love to hear it from you. We also have a Buy Me a Coffee page, which we will link in the show notes, where you can support the show monetarily if you really, really like what we're doing. So, James, Resident Evil 2 done and dusted. What is next?
Yeah, so it's my pick. And in a few weeks, we're going to be guesting on Dave's podcast, Tales from the Backlog. And he joined us for the Killer 7 episode the other week. So we're going to be playing Deadly Premonition on his show, which is going to be a fascinating game to talk about, to say the least. Very odd. This will be very fun. I'm actually think it's going to be more wild to talk about than the Killer episode 7 was, which is crazy to me, but here we are.
We can't just pick a normal game when it comes to Dave.
Yeah, definitely has to be a funny one. So that's going to be excellent. We look forward to that. So with that in mind, time's a bit limited, so I wanted to pick a bit of a shorter game. So we're actually going to be playing through Crisis 1, which is about, I think, 8 to 12 hours. And I'm interested in this one because this game's claim to fame back in the day was its amazing visuals. So I'm wondering, like, with the many years that has passed since it came out, that's gonna not be as prominent now. So is it gonna hold up even without that to its name?
It's so weird for me to think of this game as being like more than 15 years old and eligible for the podcast, because yeah, this is the game that when it came out, everyone was like, "Can your PC run Crisis?" I remember, downloading it and playing it and running it at 20 frames per second and being pretty happy with myself.
Something tells me it's going to run a lot better than Deadly Premonition has been running. Let me tell you, that game is not well made.
Yeah, I sure hope so. Hopefully, more than 15 years later, it can run at a smooth frame rate, but you never know. Alrighty, so that does it. We'll join you in a few weeks for Crisis.
See you then, guys. Thanks for listening.